Right, what we're going to look at tonight is the Bible and our health. The Bible and our health. I always try on Wednesdays and when I preach on Sundays to stick as closely as possible to preaching Christ and preaching straight from the scriptures. I sometimes like to take a little bit more liberty on a Saturday and maybe just bring in one or two other matters without straying from the Bible. So some things that I feel the Lord has taught me, and most particularly perhaps over the last 10 years, and even more perhaps more recently than that, about a Christian's health and what we might learn from the Bible about it. And what we're going to do is we'll look at, over the period of the message, we're going to look at about 4 passages. We'll look at more, but 4 springboards, if you will, 4 texts from which we're going to surround with our thoughts. And the first one is in Matthew chapter 12. Matthew chapter 12. Easy to find. Verse 15. But when Jesus knew it, he withdrew himself from thence, and great multitudes followed him, and he healed them all. He healed them all. There were no exceptions. Now recently, I don't know how recently, Wednesday, Sunday, I don't remember, I mentioned, I think, that some of our illnesses are self-inflicted. That possibly many of our illnesses are self-inflicted. But I also believe that God does use sickness, as unpopular as that might be with the charismatics. God does use sickness to bring sinners to himself, and also to chastise his people and to correct his people to a greater obedience and trust. So I'm not suggesting for a moment here, and don't suppose that I am at any point in this message, that it is a sin to be ill. I'm not suggesting that for a moment. And as I mentioned before, the blind man in John 9 was blind from his birth, and the scriptures are clear that it was no fault of his, nor was it any fault of his parents. I also believe, nevertheless, that much illness might be avoided by following biblical teachings. The Bible, when we believe it, will cure multitudes, for sure, of mental ailments, and I believe will also help us physically too. Now, some certainly among the brethren would not come back for another message after hearing tonight. We've had this happen here a long time ago in the back room. I preached one night from Revelation. The bloke said it was too political, we never saw him again. And you might feel perhaps this is unimportant and a failure to preach Christ, but there's 2 answers I would give you to that. First of all, the Bible itself does give counsel on health and sickness. Therefore, the Lord has something to say. And if the Lord has chosen to record it in the scriptures, it's our business to read it, it's our business to understand it, and it's a preacher's business to make it known. Secondly, sickness could spoil your prayer life, it can spoil your service, and it can spoil your Bible reading. And it certainly does mine. When I get sick, I don't want to read the Bible. I don't want to. People, I'm sure, react differently. Maybe some people would pray more. I pray less if I'm feeling really ill, and I'm not inclined to read my Bible. So sickness can be a real hindrance. Not only that, the Lord would have us attend the meetings, and sickness could keep you away and slow down, because folks are away oftentimes through sickness. It's not a criticism. I'm away sometimes myself through sickness, but it slows down the church's ministry. We miss opportunities for fellowship, and we miss opportunity for service. So we want to be effective in our service, and we want to attend the meetings as often as possible. And so therefore we would do well to ask if God has help in his word, that we might be both mentally and physically well. Let's look at another passage then now, 2 Chronicles. 2nd book of Chronicles, that's of course way back before the Psalms. Now you're all hardened, I say hardened, that's not the right word to use. You're all long-time saints here, so you can find 2nd Chronicles without much trouble. You'll probably all be there before me. But 2nd Chronicles chapter 16. And verse 12. And Asa, in the 39th year of his reign, was diseased in his feet, until his disease was exceeding great. Yet in his disease he sought not to the Lord, but to the physicians. Now I'm quite sure that this is not written in praise of Asa. This is written to suggest to us that he would have done well to have gone first to the Lord, and maybe even only to the Lord with his disease, and he clearly did not do that. And I would suggest to you that surely this verse implies that the Lord would have healed him even in a day when there were no charismatic gifts. There were not the kind of charismatic gifts generally through the Old Testament period that we read about, say, in the book of 1 Corinthians. The only real miracle workers, although there were some, of course, happened with Moses, but there were not many miracle workers throughout the Old Testament except for Elijah and Elisha. Of course, miraculous things happened. You know, Daniel was preserved in the den of lions. Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego were preserved in the fire. But the kind of miracles and things that we read about, I say miracles, gifts that we read about in 1 Corinthians 13 are fairly rare in the Old Testament. Nevertheless, the implication here in this verse is that if he had taken heed to the Lord, if he'd sought to the Lord rather than the physicians, he would have been healed. Now, I have to say this, I'm not telling you, okay, not to go to the doctors. But I believe Christians frequently behave like Asa. And for many years, I've believed we ought to exercise extreme caution in visiting the doctors. And we'll go into this in more detail as we proceed. If we would only give the Lord a little longer, I think with many of our complaints, he would directly intervene. Sometimes, you know, more and more these days, I get something wrong with it, and I just think, oh, the Lord will sort it out, and I just leave it, and in a few days it's gone. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer. You know, I might get a strange pain, I wonder where that's come from, might have it for 2 or 3 days, and then it's gone, so I don't bother going to the doctors. Furthermore, and most importantly, I think if we will pay attention to the scriptures, we will often get direction from the Lord as to what we should do, and I'm going to testify about that a little bit later on. To touch first and very briefly on mental complaints. Sometimes mental problems are organic, that is to say they're physiological. They're caused by maybe some plaque in the brain. I was talking, one of my pupils is a pharmacist, a qualified pharmacist, and she was telling me about some of the causes of Alzheimer's, and she was referring to what they call plaque. You sometimes refer to the residue that you get on the teeth, they call that plaque. But you can get it on your brain as well, and it can lead to mental disorders. That's physiological. I'm not talking so much about that, although sometimes, as we hope we'll see later, that also can be through carelessness of our own, and there's a remedy in the Word of God, sometimes even for the physiological ones. But there are many psychological ailments that are not caused directly through some organic or physical problem with the brain, such as, for example, depression. And oftentimes I believe that depression is a consequence of unbelief. During the week I was watching one of my alternative news programs. Well, there's only one I tend to watch mostly. And the guy, I was looking on the website afterwards, and an article on there by Bertrand Russell. Bertrand Russell was a nasty piece of work, make no mistake. He was a philosopher, he was a particularly wicked man and a nasty piece of work. And on this website there was an article by Bertrand Russell, which I read, and then I found myself feeling really depressed. I thought, why am I depressed? And it took a little while to occur to me it was Bertrand Russell that had made me depressed with his wicked ideas. You know, if you're not in the Bible, and if you're not reading the promises of God, if all you're hearing all the time is bad news, it's hardly surprising people get depressed. And so mental ailments like depression can often be a consequence of unbelief. It certainly was in my case. I'll testify before you tonight, as God is my witness, that the Holy Scriptures brought me out of clinical and hospitalising depression. It was as a consequence of the Lord bringing me out that I got saved. There was a day when I was seriously depressed, suicidally depressed, And the Lord brought me to his word and delivered me by his word. And if you take nothing else away tonight, take that away. That the word of God can really and truly deal with depression. Not only that, but the scriptures keep me from depression. I have, I think, a slightly melancholy disposition. I'm inclined, what they call it bipolar these days. I'm inclined to swing from one side to the other. We were going down to London, taking my brother back down to London. Jean was driving. I was sitting in the passenger seat. My brother's in the back, and I just said I'm going to have a few 40 weeks. I tipped the chair back. I had a little sleep. For, I don't know, 20 minutes or so. And then I got up and I put some music on. I'm tapping away and I'm drumming. And my brother said, "You go from one extreme to the other, you do, don't you?" and he's probably right. I am slightly, I wouldn't say clinically, but slightly bipolar. I can be, and I do have this disposition sometimes to be slightly melancholy, but I find that the Bible keeps me from depression. It really does. The Apostle Peter does not refer to the scriptures as exceeding great and precious promises for nothing. That's what they are. We read in Timothy, "For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind." And the world is after your mind tonight. Largely the minds of the kids it's got. Our youth now are losing their minds. They are losing their minds, and it's a deliberate ploy of government and the universities and the education system. Bertrand Russell says the way to control people is by education, injection and injunction. And we'll talk about Bertrand Russell. And we'll talk about the injections a little bit later on. Have a look with me for a moment at Proverbs 18. This is not one of our foundational texts tonight, but it's worth a look. Proverbs 18. And verse 14, and just the first half of the verse 14 of Proverbs 18. "The spirit of a man will sustain his infirmity." John Trapp comments, "Let a man be sound within and upon good terms, at peace with his own conscience, and he will bravely bear unspeakable pressures." This is exactly what the text means. The spirit of a man will sustain his infirmity, but a wounded spirit who can bear. So Trapp says, let me repeat it, "Let a man be sound within and upon good terms, at peace with his own conscience, and he will bravely spare unspeakable pressures." Does the Bible have anything to say to us about doctors or physicians? Now, there are 12 references altogether in the Old Testament and New Testament to physicians. And you could charge me with being biased here, with a biased selection here. But I believe the first mention is always important. So let's go to the first reference to physicians in the Bible, which is in Genesis and chapter 50. Genesis and chapter 50. Again, this is not one of our foundational texts. Genesis and chapter 50. The first time we find the word physicians. Verse 2. "And Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father, and the physicians embalmed Israel." So the first time doctors turn up in the Bible, they're burying somebody. I think that's significant. John Trapp said, "It is grown to a proverb, no physician can be his craft's master till he have been the death of 30 men." He says it was proverbial in his days. No physician, no doctor is the master of his craft until he's been the death of 30 men, they used to say. Vernon Coleman, I should be mentioning Vernon Coleman a little bit tonight. This book here, How to Stop Your Doctor Killing You. Vernon Coleman is a GP. He's getting on a bit now. He used to be on the television a lot. He writes in the papers a lot. He's written lots of books, and he warns about the medical profession. How to stop your doctor killing you. He's about as popular as a ham sandwich in a synagogue in the medical community. Now he says in this book, How to Stop Your Doctor Killing You, quote, "The person most likely to kill you is not a relative or a friend or a mugger or a burglar, or a drunken driver, the person most likely to kill you is your doctor. That's coming from a doctor. Again, he says 1 in 6 patients in hospital are there because they've been made ill by doctors. They call that iatrogenic disease. Iatro, or something, I think it's the Greek word from which iatro comes, or iatrogenesis comes, means healing, I believe. In this very same book here, and I couldn't find the quote, but I'm pretty sure it's in this book, Dr. Coleman cites occasions and statistics, both in this country and abroad, where when the doctors went on strike, the death rate went down. And I wished I could have found the quotes, but I can't. But in a number of places, on a number of occasions, the doctors went on strike and the death rate dropped. Far less people died when the doctors went on holiday. This is according to a doctor, a medical doctor. He's a doctor himself. Now, in fairness to you, and in honesty to you, and in fairness to Dr. Coleman, at the introduction of his book, he says this, quote, "This book is not intended to be and cannot be an alternative to personal, professional medical advice." But by the time you finish the book, you're loath to go to the doctor's list. I certainly was. Now, again, I don't need to tell you, I'm not a qualified physician. I'm not a doctor. Nevertheless, if I was to quote pertinent scriptures to you, with some mental difficulty, not you with mental difficulties, certain people with mental difficulties, if I was to quote the scriptures, I could do a better job of putting those people right than the average psychiatrist. I'm sure I could. As the physical ailments, bear with me. Just to think again of what does the Bible say about physicians. We've read what it says in Genesis 15. We've read what it said there in 2 Chronicles 16, that Asa never sought the Lord. He resorted rather to the physicians than the Lord. And clearly it's meant there as a warning, if you will, and as a kind of a rebuke. Have a look at Mark chapter 5. Mark chapter 5. And verse 25. "And a certain woman which had an issue of blood 12 years, and had suffered many things of many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was nothing bettered, but rather grew worse." Bible doesn't exactly paint a wonderful picture of physicians, does it? I know somebody will remind me, Paul refers to Luke as the beloved physician. But in all the book of Acts, you never find Luke at work. Now, no doubt Luke could give counsel. Doctors are very different these days, I believe, from the way they were back then, but that's a line we won't have time to pursue tonight. So in the light of the warning from a modern doctor like Dr. Coleman, you might remember this passage here before you go too hastily to the doctor. Now, whether you go or not is your business. I'm not here to tell you whether you should or whether you shouldn't go. I'm simply warning you that you should not blindly trust a man because he has a degree and a stethoscope. They are pressing us more and more now, come the winter, to get jabbed. More and more, you know, the line is, you know, if you have the jab, you might not need to go to the doctors afterwards. I'd be interested to see really some statistics about how much flu it cures and how much flu it causes and how many deaths it kills. I've noticed just lately another advert has gone up. I'm not sure who's promoting it. I can't remember the name. You know how it is with adverts sometimes. You chuckle at the advert and you can't think who's advertising. You know, who was that? I don't know. But there's one, they put it up now in bus shelters, and it's a recommendation to go and get yourself flu jabbed. I think that's what it is. And there's a guy stood there, a nice elderly guy with his spectacles on and his white coat. Put a white coat on him, see, and everybody falls for it. Don't fall for that. Just because he's got a degree and a stethoscope doesn't necessarily mean he's going to help you. So let's think about physical ailments a little more. Is there any positive guidance in the Word of God? And the best way I can illustrate this is by personal testimony. And you may have heard some of this, you maybe have heard all of this before. Many of you know that 7 years ago I was seriously ill with pancreatitis. Pancreatitis, according to a guy I heard on the radio who suffered from it, kills one person in 5. Most agonising complaint. I was in hospital from Tuesday the 3rd to Sunday the 8th of November 2009. I came out still suffering from so much pain that I was out of bed every hour and a half to 2 hours and taking paracetamol to the limit. They say that you shouldn't take more than 8 paracetamol in 24 hours. And, you know, I didn't do that, but I desperately wanted to. After the worst of those pains was over, having come out of hospital, which I think took maybe another week or so, I was left with pains in my groin, pains in my lower abdomen, and pains in my back around my kidneys, worrying pains, like there was something growing there. But I'd already read Dr. Coleman before this had happened to me. I'd read this book, and I was a bit concerned, and I was reluctant, therefore, excuse me, to go back to the doctors in case they decided to cut me open and start pulling pieces out, which they like to do. And one morning, after continuing discomfort with these pains, I poured my heart out earnestly to the Lord. I really, really wanted to know, Lord, what shall I do? Do I carry on waiting for you to deal with this, or do I go to the doctor? And I poured my heart out in earnest prayer to the Lord. The same day, my answer came out of the scriptures with such clear power that I knew it was for me, and I knew the Lord had given this word specially for me. And if you want to turn with me, it's Psalm 118. Psalm 118. This was the Lord's answer. You know, the Lord can answer you. You'd be surprised what the Lord can give you out of the Bible in answer to prayers that you think there's nothing in the Bible that can answer this. And, you know, and you really give the matter to the Lord, he will speak to you sometimes from the most remarkable places. Psalm 118. This was the text that came to me that day with considerable power. Verse 8. It is better to trust in the Lord than to put confidence in man. That's what Asa did. It is better to trust in the Lord than to put confidence in man. Now I remember telling one believer, at least one believer, about this promise, this word I got from the Lord, and their response was, you ought to go to the doctors. This was a Christian. I said, I've prayed about this, I'm suffering with these pains, but I've prayed about it, and the Lord has given me this word, and the reply was, you ought to go to the doctor. I don't know, maybe if I'd said that to you at that period, maybe you might have said that to me. And if so, the simple question I would ask you is this: does God ever speak to you through his word? And if he does, would you listen to me if I told you otherwise? And you need to look at your leisure at 1 Kings 13 for further details on that score. Very interesting chapter. Now the discomfort continued. Even after this word from the Lord, the discomfort continued. It wasn't so much pain now as a discomfort. And it continued perhaps for nearly 12 months until finally it just cleared up altogether. And when I told her during that period, while I was still suffering mild discomfort, I told a charismatic friend about it, a brother, I believe is a brother, and that I was trusting the Lord. He got very angry and upset that I did not feel the need for him to heal me on the spot. He felt, you know, having just told me he'd been suffering himself with something for 2 years, he felt it was imperative that he should lay his hands on me and heal me there and then. And because I said I was trusting the Lord, he got rather agitated and angry. I want to take you to another basic verse here now, and it's a very important one in Psalm 139. And this, again, is one of our foundational verses for this study tonight. Psalm 139. And verse 14. I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvellous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. You see, we live now in a society that is mostly composed of unbelievers. I don't need to prove that to you, you know that's so. And it touches everything, and it touches the medical profession. And most people who are not Christians, I imagine, are evolutionists. They believe in Darwin's idea that we came up from the slime via the monkeys and so forth, and that we are evolving, and that we're nothing more than chemicals, and therefore we know better how to fix people's bodies. We know that we ought to cut people's tonsils out. We know that we ought to cut people's appendixes out, and it's all wrong. You know, years ago they would cut chunks out, miles of intestines out of people, and they would die because they don't need all this intestine, and they'd cut it up and people would die. And that's the fruit of evolutionary thinking. But the Bible says, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. And that's fundamental. We need to really get a hold of this, because this is one of the reasons why I take the views I take over modern medicine, because God knew what he was doing when he made us. And these bodies of ours, you might not, you know, when you get on a bit and they start to ache a bit, you might not think so. But these bodies of ours are incredible pieces of I was going to say machinery. They're not, they're organic, aren't they? And do you know that our bodies are designed to heal themselves? For example, when you vomit, I hope you don't vomit very often, thankfully I don't, but when you vomit, that is not really so much that the vomiting is your body making you well. When you're sick, it's because your stomach says there's something here that shouldn't be here, it's bad for you, out it comes. It's a healing procedure. Throwing up, as horrible as it is a healing procedure. The body knows that there's something there that shouldn't be there, and whether you like it or not, up she comes. The body, you see, your body knows there's harmful matter in your stomach. When you cut yourself, depending on the severity of the cut, of course, if you cut your arm off with a chainsaw, it's going to lie on the grass, it's not likely to heal. But your average cut, you know, your body heals the wound. You get a bruise, give it time, and your body will heal the bruise. I smacked my toe recently quite severely on the stairs, and I thought I'd broken it. It was a real clout, and it went blue. By the end of the day, it was black and blue. And had I not been, you know, had the views I had, I might have got the doctor says, I think I broke my toe. I thought, I'll just leave it and see what happens. And of course, the blue just went away after a while, and it's okay now. I can jump, I can still skip. It's okay now. Now, Vernon Coleman, the GP I mentioned earlier, How to Stop Your Doctor Killing You, he's not a Christian, but he maintains that the body has an amazing ability to heal itself. That's why I think this is such a good book, because this is old-fashioned medicine. The things he recommends, fresh air, water, proper diet, all those kinds. It's a gem of a book. And you know, he says, he speaks so much about the body's ability to heal it. Now, he's not a Christian, but what he proves to me when I read him is the proof of what we read here. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. So unwittingly he endorses Psalm 139:14. Another doctor that I've read quite a lot of, and I've got his books in my shop, is a man called Feridun Batman Gilij. He was an Iranian, and he wrote a number of very helpful books on the sickening side effects of dehydration. Very, very interesting books. And he claims that many of our illnesses, and I'm inclined to agree, are caused simply because we do not drink enough water. How simple is that? You know, you read throughout the Bible of you know, the sheep being taken to the well and to the water. When the woman comes out to the well of Samaria, you know, water is a vital, and God's provided that. It's free. It's one of the best things you can get for so many of our illnesses. Now, his first book, I think it was his first book, this is Feridun Batman Gilij, was called Your Body's Many Cries for Water. You're not sick, you're just thirsty. Now, whatever good thing comes out on YouTube or on the internet, there's always some dumbbell that's got to oppose it. And so there's a site called Quackwatch. And on this site called Quackwatch, there is Feridun Batman Gilij, and the guy is saying, he's dead now, the guy is saying Batman Gilij was a phony. Now, I don't trust that Quackwatch for a minute, because I've found that much of what Batman Gilij says by experiment is right. We'll talk about that in a moment. And again, I found the same thing reading Batman Gilij. His books are fairly detailed regarding how water affects our bodies. And it was just amazing to read how the body heals itself. He goes into a fair bit of detail. And I got the clear impression from reading his book, and neither is he a Christian, that I am fearfully and wonderfully made. If you take nothing at all away tonight, take this away. Psalm 139, verse 14. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Again, let me underscore that the doctors want to pump you with stuff because they don't think you're fearfully and wonderfully made. They want you to have injections all the time and all kinds of treatments because they don't believe that you're fearfully and wonderfully made. Now, both Vernon Coleman, and you would find in here, recommends water. Says that people are hydrated is a cause of a lot of problems. And it's Batman Gillige's main theme. Now, Dr. Batman, as he was often called, maintained that just for your information here, that your total number of pounds of body weight should be divided by 2 to give you the required fluid ounces that you need of water every day. So if you're 10 stones, for example, that's 140 pounds. So you divide that by 2, that's 70, and 70 fluid ounces is what you should take every day. That's 3.5 pints of water. So if I'm a bit more than that, so if I'm 15 stone, then I'm looking at like 5 pints of water a day. So you can work out what you should be taking. Now, it's true to say, having read several of his books, that he might be a little over enthusiastic in some of the ills he says that a water regime will cure. But since I adopted that drinking of water, you always see me turning up, don't you, with bottles of water, and we'll go back into that in a moment. I have seen remarkable results. I'll probably be dead tomorrow, I probably won't be here this morning. The Lord knows. But this is true. I'll give you some examples. I often used to wake up depressed in the morning, especially in the winter. I suffer from what they call SAD, seasonally affected disorder. I don't like the winter. And I often would wake up on a winter morning depressed. That stopped. That was due to dehydration. And when I started drinking water, and I've got a glass of water now, my dear wife has bought me a carafe, and I have a carafe of water by the side of my bed. First thing in the morning I drink some water. But I don't generally wake up depressed at all these days. My gums used to bleed at night, and this went on for years. It was at least 10, maybe as many as 20 years. My gums would bleed when I cleaned my teeth at night. When I started drinking the water, it stopped. They haven't bled for 6 or 7 years. The only thing I really changed was making sure I was properly hydrated. I had arthritis in my late 40s. That rarely bothers me now. When the winter comes on sharply cold, I feel it. But, you know, again, I think the water's made a big difference there. Now, all sorts of things. I mean, I'm just telling you some of the ones that I have found for myself. You can buy decongestants. Covonia is a famous brand. And this pharmacist, quite amusing actually, this pharmacist I work with, she says there's different, I think it was Covonia she was talking about, there's different packets in different colours for the different kind of cough you have. You have a dry cough, or you have a chesty cough, or you have a tickly cough, and so on. And they're in different coloured boxes. She says the ingredients in every bottle are exactly the same. The only difference is the colour of the box. And people come in and they say, I want the orange one, or I want the red one. She says the ingredients are identical. So, and what did I find about congestion? You know, sometimes you've got some phlegm on your chest, you can't get it up, so they'll tell you to get some Covonia. Glass of water will do it. 15 minutes, up she comes. It's amazing. This is my experience, and again, I've woken up once or twice dizzy with vertigo. You know, I got up and the room starts to swim, and you don't get out of bed. And I found again a couple of glasses of water, half an hour, I'm up and I'm fine. Now, we're not all the same. This is something else that modern medicine, you know, modern medicine treats people like they're on a conveyor belt, and has forgotten the fact that we're not the same. We are different. What might do me good could harm you. But God gave us water. So I'm not really too worried about recommending water to you tonight. But there will be a proviso which I'm coming up with in a moment. And Chris and Mary already know what it is. What works for me may not work for you. But if you avoid dehydration, you might be surprised at the results. Now, as I say, water is free. God made it. So you haven't got to be afraid of just increasing your water intake if you don't think you're drinking enough. I have spoken about this before. I remember speaking about it in the back when we first came here. Now the fact that it's such a natural product certainly minimises any worries I had about increasing my water intake. Now I want to say this, and this is the proviso if you plan to increase your water: don't use tap water. Tap water can be harmful. First, because many of the medicines that people take now, they're so potent. It's urinated into the water system, it's flushed away, it goes to the sewage treatment plant, but it's so strong the sewage treatment plant can't, and it comes back through the tap. So people now are taking so many drugs for so many things. It's not just the younger generation that are taking heroin and cocaine. It's the older generation who are going to the doctors at the drop of a hat, who are taking all kinds of stuff which are supposed to be good for them, rather than, you know, fantasizing stuff like the youth take. The old are taking stuff, and it's all going into the water system, and some of it is coming back, and it's coming back through the tap. You don't want to be drinking that stuff. Some of it won't get removed when you boil it either. But I don't want to be scary here, but you'll see where I'm going in a moment. As I say, water treatment plants, and again it's according to Dr. Colin, you can find it all in here, can't remove all the toxic chemicals, so they come back through your tap. It's also very important to say why I recommend that you don't drink tap water is because it has fluoride in it, sodium fluoride, and that's very harmful. And this is why, you know, Jean and I, about every 6 weeks, we go to Malvern and we get the water straight from the spring there, because there's no fluoride in it. Now, let me just tell you a few facts about the fluoride in your tap water. This is from a very a charming book, a book that, you know, is not going to make the bestseller list. It's a book called Murder by Injection, and it's by a guy called Eustace Mullins. And there's a chapter on fluoridation. I'll just point out one or two things that he says here. Sodium fluoride is what goes into the water, and they put it in the water because they told us it would be good for our teeth. The problem was that sodium fluoride is a byproduct of the manufacture of aluminium, and they didn't know what to do with it. It's hard to dispose of, so they told everybody it's good for your teeth, and they stick it in the water supply. And it has a cumulative effect. This fluoride builds up in the body, doesn't go away. And about the time that this fluoridation was brought into Washington DC, the seat of the American government, about the time they brought the fluoridation in, which was done by a man called Ewing, I'll tell you more about him in a moment, bottled water appeared on every office in Capitol Hill. In other words, once the fluoridation program went in the capital city, Washington, they stopped drinking tap water because they knew it's got fluoride in it. And still, the book, Eustace Mullins' book Murder by Injection, was written in 1988, and still then they're having bottled water rather, when they have meetings in Washington. There was one senator apparently who used to, if he went to a fancy restaurant in Washington, he'd take a flask of water with him. He'd say, "There's no way I'm drinking that stuff out the tap. But it's all right for you to drink. It doesn't matter if it kills you. It doesn't matter if it kills the average American, but, you know, they know better in Washington." Now, the effect of this sodium fluoride slows down the vitally important DNA repair enzyme activity of the immune system, according to Eustace Mullins. Amazing book. He also says this, Mullins, quote, "In his authoritative work, Fluoride, the Aging Factor, which has never been refuted by any scientific study," that was in 1988, Dr. Yamuyanis finds that from 30,000 to 50,000 deaths a year are directly traceable to fluoridation, from 10 to 20,000 of these deaths being from fluoride-induced cancers. West Germany banned fluoridation of the water in November 1971. Sweden banned fluoridation of the water in June 1973. Again, Mullins says Soviet studies show, now we're getting into some interesting territory, now we're suddenly coming into Bertrand Russell's realm. Soviet studies show, says Mullins, that fluorides were extremely important in introducing a docile, sheep-like obedience in the general population. What was it that Bertrand Russell said? How do you control the people? Education, injection and injunction. Well, you give them fluoride, and according to Soviet studies, it'll make you dopey. I mean, we have got some really dopey people now in the country. I was watching a clip on YouTube. I couldn't believe my ears. And the guy was asking people just general knowledge questions, but he was relating them to Donald Trump's recent victory in the election. And he said to this one, in fact to 2 or 3 people, do you think that Donald Trump's kids, if he gets to be president, do you think his kids ought to be put on trial for hunting Triceratops? Now, Triceratops is a dinosaur, okay? Triceratops was a dinosaur that died out thousands and thousands of years ago. So he'd say to these people, do you think Donald Trump's kids should be, if he gets to be president, do you think he should go to court for hunting Triceratops? Oh yeah. They got no idea he was talking about a dinosaur. I mean, you just blow your mind, you listen to the answers that these people are coming out with. Too much fluoride, I think that's the problem. Mullins also connects aluminium with Alzheimer's. The latest news we've had is this month, Alzheimer's has now taken over from heart disease as the biggest killer in the country. Of course, Alzheimer's doesn't kill you. Alzheimer's makes you careless maybe, so that you might end up burning yourself or poisoning yourself or whatever, but it's not a direct killer. But nevertheless, disease related to Alzheimer's, or rather deaths as a consequence of Alzheimer's, now exceed even heart disease. And one of the major causes of Alzheimer's, according to some people, according to Mullins, is aluminium. Now, I know some of you know what chemtrails are. Most people don't know what chemtrails are. You go out on a summer's day now and you look up in the sky and you'll see these big trails across the sky. They look like clouds, but they're not clouds. They're trails of chemicals. It's aluminium. They've been tipping it on our heads now since 1999. Some people don't think, there's any conspiracies going on. Been going on for 17 years, the government's never said a word. Aluminium is coming down on our heads. I wonder whether that's why the Alzheimer's rate is going up. I'll just mention another thing as well, because it does connect with the Word of God. The knowledge of the Scriptures, the promises of God can give you peace. I'll just quote you from Vernon Coleman here. And I've found this out recently in my own experience. He says this: stress causes or makes worse over 90% of illnesses. And I have found that if I get stressed, I'm inclined to get a cold. I don't know, I shan't mention any names because we're being recorded here, but a brother we all know well has been poorly recently, and I would suggest that that's because of the stress he's been under recently. The illness he's got is, what the doctor would call these days a viral infection, and he's been given some antibiotics, but I would strongly suggest that the cause of that viral infection was stress. And stress can cause so much. I have found in my own experience it will bring on a cold if I'm not careful. And how can you avoid stress? The Scriptures. The Scriptures. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Take that away with you. We need to remember the promises of God. So let's just get back for a moment or two. So as I say, water is free. God made it. The fact that it's such a natural product minimised any worries I had about increasing my intake. Mainstream medicine these days just wants to pump you full of stuff because it's a money spinner. Sadly, the pharmaceutical company is making a lot of money. The guy named Ewing, who was very high in the American government, who introduced fluoridation into the water in America, happened to be on the managing board of an aluminium manufacturer. Isn't that interesting? That's what you call a conflict of interest. Pharmaceuticals are a major profit maker, and they're more concerned about their profits than whether you die, believe me. Vernon Coleman again points out, the average doctor sits in his office and he'll have a phone call and it'll be a rep from a pharmaceutical company. We've got this new drug, it's excellent for thinning the blood. or it's excellent for heart disease or so on. Can we come and talk to you about it? So the guy will go to the doctor, the pharmaceutical rep will go to the doctor with a packet of these pills or whatever, and he'll say, these are great for heart disease. They've passed all the clinical trials. If you start prescribing these, we'll give you a set of golf balls. Or if you'll start prescribing these, we'll give you the holiday in Florida next year. That's what happens. And you and I go in there and they give us this stuff. It's not been properly tested. The pharmaceutical companies are making money out of it. I used to laugh at the idea, really. You know, when I first suffered from depression before I was a Christian, I used to laugh at the idea that poor nutrition could be responsible for depression. But what we eat and what we drink is a major factor in our health. Your food is your medicine. I say to you, I don't like broccoli. I don't like cabbage, but I say, give me some broccoli because my food is my medicine. And you know, if we're wise, we will eat stuff we don't like. I'm not suggesting you should have a curry jar, but we should eat stuff we don't like, because particularly greens and vegetables are good for us. It's medicine. God put the goodness there so that we wouldn't get sick. But we go to McDonald's all the time and we stuff our face with junk all the time, and I drink too much Coca-Cola, and then we wonder why we're not well. It's likely, is it likely that rather that God who made us and made us fearful and wonderfully should not provide all the things our bodies need in nature? He does. I'm sure he does. One last place in the Bible, Deuteronomy 28. Deuteronomy chapter 28, and then we'll have some medicine that Chris and Mary have provided. Deuteronomy 28, verse 58. Deuteronomy 28, verse 58. If thou wilt not observe to do all the words of this law that are written in this book, that thou mayest fear this glorious and fearful name, the Lord thy God, then the Lord will make thy plagues wonderful, and the plagues of thy seed, even great plagues and of long continuance, and sore sicknesses and of long continuance. Moreover, he will bring upon thee all the diseases of Egypt, which thou wast afraid of, and they shall cleave unto thee. Also every sickness and every plague which is not written in the book of this law, them will the Lord bring upon thee until thou be destroyed. And ye shall be left few in number, whereas ye were as the stars of heaven for multitude, because thou wouldest not obey the voice of the Lord thy God. One of the most important contributors to physical as well as mental health is to believe and to obey the word of God. This is written to Israel, but I think it's still true. To believe and to obey the word of God is the way to, at least from a human perspective, if I put it like that, minimise the chances that you're going to be ill. You know, the more we're about God's service, the more useful we are, the more we might hope. Yes, he might make us sick to teach us some other lesson, but let's not make ourselves ill through disobedience. It's a sinful and a selfish disregard of the commandments of God that often puts men and women in harm's way. In conclusion then, just finally, the greatest remedy for all sicknesses, mental and physical, is given to us in the song, Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face. That's the way to get rid of stress. Oh, I'll tell you, that's the way to... And stress, says Coleman, is responsible for 90% of our illnesses. Turn your eyes upon Jesus, look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace.